Hello, welcome to Pro Tips number 58. Today I'll be talking about Patch Tuesday. I'll be looking a lot at the history of Patch Tuesday and a lot at how we changed Patch Tuesday recently. So if you're not familiar, if you're not aware, we've recently done a lot of changes to Patch Tuesday, which have made it better, but it works different now, the reports that we send out every month. As well as I want to show you some ways of how you can create charts. So I've seen in the community people want some charts on Patch Tuesday. Now it's obviously a thing that changes every single month because new patches come out every Patch Tuesday every month. But I want to show you how you can create those charts yourself so that you can basically create them in the coming months if you want to use them and have a dashboard on Patch Tuesday itself. So let's dive into the first kind of topics while I will go to the dashboard that I've created and that's ready there. While I leave this on the background, I'll just be talking about a little bit about Patch Tuesday, the history. So where did Patch Tuesday come from? That really started back in, I believe it was like 2017. WannaCry, I believe, was the big vulnerability or the big security issue around Windows, and it had to be fixed with a Windows update. And that's kind of where we saw where people started asking around like, hey, can we get reporting or an example of how we do reports on Windows updates? Follow that on a couple of months or follow it the following couple of months. I saw more and more requests for this, and they wanted an updated version each month, so we started updating it. And that over time turned into Patch Tuesday, where I started adding columns depending on what people were asking on the forums and the community, and basically started building it out like that. And it has stayed the same for most of those years. Every so often I add a field or so if I see that people ask one and it makes sense. Obviously, with these kind of requests, I have to keep in mind whether this is a request that's useful for everyone, so the entire audience, or if it's somebody that's just somebody that wants to ask a personal request like, oh, no, in my company, we do it this way, or we filter on this, or we're only interested in this. That's all great. But really, to look at Patch Tuesday, I have to keep everyone in mind. That needs to work for everyone. So that can pose some challenges. One of the things that is a big challenge is when it comes to these patches, there is a lack of consistency, you could say. There's not a lot of logic in them. Meaning especially when you look at the patch numbers. So as historically speaking, in the old version of Patch Tuesday, we would always look at the patch numbers. So you always have as you can see here on the dashboard, your KB something, 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 something. Those are your patches. They're always numbered. You would think that that numbering is logical. It only goes up, etc. It is not. I've looked at these kind of things and I've looked at improving this many times. But there are issues like this, for example, where if Microsoft works on a mid-month patch to fix an emergency issue, they will assign this a patch number. I don't know their process of when they choose which number or when the number gets assigned. I would think that these numbers are getting reserved ahead of time, and all of a sudden when a emergency patch comes in, they just start using the next available number. However, since the next month's patches numbers have already been reserved, they will start using a number that's higher than the patch numbers for the coming month. All of this means that these numbers are not necessarily in order, which means that you cannot really use these patch numbers as a reliable source in order to see, well, if your patch numbers or if you have a patch installed with a higher number than X or Y, it means you're safe. Doesn't work like that. If there are mid-month updates that come out, it'll start messing up that logic and it won't work. Another thing is obviously when you deploy new machines, then there might not be an update history. We pull these patch numbers from the Windows update history. If you have a new device that you've just deployed, it might not have an update history. So we won't be able to tell, is it up to date or not, because there's no patches that have been scanned. So issues like that, along with the fact that if you run a Patch Tuesday report from 3 months ago, it will be basically messed up due to the issues that I just mentioned. For one, if the old Patch Tuesday reports really looked at a specific list of updates that were released for that month, if your device does not have one of the 10 or 11 updates listed in that grouping, then it would show out of date. It might be that you deployed new devices, like I just mentioned, that might not have that patch installed because they already came, the OS, when you installed it, it was already up to date to a certain degree. Or there might be other circumstances that will basically cause false negatives to appear, especially, and this happens a lot in older Patch Tuesdays, and that will matter in regards to when you basically, if your update cycle is a little bit slower, maybe you wait 15 days, maybe you have different deployment rings, etc. It might happen that some devices only update after the next month's patches have just been released. Different companies have different strategies with this. It can, or it will cause issues when you're using a Patch Tuesday that is older than a month. And that's also something that I wanted to see if I could remediate and fix. So what does that mean? Coming to the actual report now, what does that mean? That means that we're no longer working with patch numbers. So I've done away with patch numbers, aside from, and it's again, there is one exception, which is the older servers. Why? Well, Microsoft only started working with builds and putting builds into their WMI and their kind of internal, system database, let's say, or their device database known as WMI. They really only started putting builds in there starting from Windows 10 and all the server versions that have been released since Windows 10. So for server, I think that means Server 2016 is the first one that has that. That means that currently Server 2012, which is still supported, while it's still supported, it does not have, or we're unable to retrieve a build number from Windows Server 2012. Why? Because of Microsoft. It's not something that we're not scanning. Microsoft does not provide that in the WMI classes, which means that for the older operating systems, we are still relying on the patches. However, anything newer, so anything since Windows 10 was released, we're now looking at builds. As you can see here in the report, I've added here to the dashboard, you can see that we now have build number here. One thing that I've also added is the highest patch number installed. This is just for you, just to give an indication of what the highest patch number is that we've been able to find. This is informational. It is not being used in the logic to determine whether it's up to date or not. Purely informational, so you have some kind of indication. Then we provide when this patch was installed on. By default, it only gives a date. Microsoft does not write down or does not provide any kind of timestamp on it, unfortunately, which will come back later. So the main thing that we will be looking at is the build. That does bring with it an extra item, which is when does that build actually update. The build usually updates once the patch has been installed and a reboot has taken place. On the one side, you could say, well, that might make the report more inaccurate because you might have installed a patch, but it's not recognizing it yet as being up to date because the build number hasn't been updated yet. In reality, it makes the report actually more accurate because previously in old reports, it might have shown as a device being up to date because you had the patch installed. However, patches need to be applied. Therefore, reboot needs to take place. So in order for it to really be protected and really be up to date, you have to have done that reboot. Previously, when we focused on, or we used the patch number and the patch being installed as a indicator or a metric for it being up to date, this was not taken into consideration. Now, by switching to builds, we are taking that into consideration. That means that if a device now says that it's up to date, it actually means that 1, the patch has been installed, and 2, it has been rebooted because the build number has gone up. So whatever patch has been installed, it has also been applied, which is an important factor to take into account when you think about, whether these devices are really safe or not. So in actuality, the report now is more accurate due to the usage of the build numbers. On top of that, like I mentioned, reboots play a larger role now because you might install a patch, and in the previous report, the old version, it might have said, oh, you're all good now. Yep, you've installed the patch. Now, that's no longer the case. You have to have it rebooted most of the time, so because most patches require a reboot. Before the report will also indicate that it's safe. To help with that, I added an additional column, the reboot column. the reboot status one. Now this uses a combination of data points. It uses the installed on data points, so we know what date the patch was installed on. We also know based on the uptime calendar, and I'll see here if I just pull that up. So by default, Lansweeper will scan the event log for like boot related events, and it will use that to create an uptime calendar. That's here. You go to the month calendar even. And you can see here, this is a server that's pretty much always on, but you can see a short blip here. You see there was a power off event here that happened. We use this kind of information, or I use this kind of information combined with when was that patch installed to give you an indication on one, is a reboot, is it required? Which means that basically we've noticed or we've seen that a patch has been installed, but there's no reboot or power off event has been found since, which means that obviously the patch was installed, but there was no reboot, which means a reboot is required. On top of that, we also give an indication when a reboot might be required. That's when the reboot event was on, for example, the same day as the installed on date. Since we don't have a timestamp on the patch installation, when it happens on the same day, we're unable to say, was this after the patch was installed? Was this before? So we just say, it might be required. So we try and give as much information as possible there on what actions you should take. Obviously, if there's certain data missing, etc., or it's not available, then we try and leave it blank. Or if it's like obvious that you haven't installed a new patch recently, we leave it blank. But we try and provide you with the additional information regarding the reboots as well. So those are two important factors, basically, the two main important factors that have changed with the new Patch Tuesday reports. One, build number. That's what we're looking at now. There's no need to look at our patches installed or not anymore. It's build number. This allows us also to be more future-proof, because now we can just say, it has to have this build number or higher. And that will always be correct, regardless of patch numbers, which, as I mentioned, the patch numbers go up and down and sometimes do strange things. Build numbers, they will always go up. There's no chance of that going down or messing up. Build numbers will always go up. So with that, we're safe with saying if you have this build number or higher, you're safe for this specific month. And that will also help with the future-proofness of this report. And then second, we've added the reboot status to give you more information about, do these devices need a reboot? And the whole report, the report as a whole, has become more accurate, because now it only provides you or only tells you a device is up to date when a patch has actually been applied, not when it's been installed. All of that being said, it basically means Patch Tuesday is now better. I want to quickly give a shout out to the many people that on the community have helped me the last 2 months, kind of indicating where issues might lie or troubleshoot some things. I know this always comes, especially with these big complex reports, it always comes with like mistakes or things that shift around, unexpected behavior that might come up. So, as always, if people have feedback, the community is there. You can provide feedback if you see strange things. Also, support is also there in case you want to reach out to support for any of these issues. But we try and make this as accurate as possible, so that every Patch Tuesday, we provide you with this report and you can use it to really get a good overview of what the status is of your updates or your deployment of these patches throughout your environment. Now, getting into the extras. I've created 2 extra charts, and I will go through how these are created, so you can basically create whatever chart you want out of the Patch Tuesday report. Now, the 2 charts that I have created are specifically for whether the up-to-date, out-of-date status, so the percentages, how many are up-to-date, how many are out-of-date, and on top of that, for the reboot status, to show you how many devices need a reboot, how many are, all right, etc. So that's shown here. Now, how are these created? So to do that, I will jump into kind of the database itself. But first, let's go to Patch Tuesday here, or just the chart. So here I have the two charts open, and we'll take one of those here and just edit it. And I mean, you could edit it in here, but I prefer to do it straight into the database here, the SQL Management Studio, because it gives me a bigger view, basically. Now, let me open a different tab as well, just to show you on top of that what the default report looks like. Because you can create, all of these charts are just created using the base report. So you can grab the report from our website as you're used to. And to create any of these charts, it's pretty simple. First thing you need to do is identify here the main select query. So that's everything above basically the from table assets that you can see here. Everything above that is the select component of the query. Now, you can pretty much remove all of that, except for the select, of course. And that will be kind of your blank canvas. So all of that basically can be removed. If I switch over to my my chart itself, you can see here the from assets, and I've only added two things above it. I'm going to add some white space here to show it to you. So what I did is you can basically select whatever data points are in here. Any of these data points, you just select whatever you want to pull out of that and put into a chart. Make sure that, you know, it has to be, you can only add two things. So you have to keep that in mind. You have your Y and your X axis, basically. So one thing, or your two values basically that you want to add. The two things that I've added here is one, I wanted to count the total number of devices, because that's usually, most of the times you'll use that. And the second one is what you want to split those by. What do you want to see them by? And for me, that was patch status. So I wanted to see how many devices are up to date, how many are out of date. And then the second one is just for the number of devices. You'll most likely need to repeat this. You'll most likely need to take the count and do a distinct count. But you can copy that from, you can either use it from this, or I'll also provide it in the blog version. I'll also provide these snippets so you can copy them and use them. And the second one is patch status. This first one, the patch status, you could replace that with everything or whatever you want, basically. You could add like the server thing in here. The other one I did was the reboot status, which I'll show in a minute, but you could add other things in there if you wanted to. So that being done, basically all you need to do is you put in your two values, one being the patch status or any other thing that you want, the other one being the distinct count here. All the rest here below the from assets, not all of this is really needed for your chart, but it doesn't really harm either. So for simplicity, you can leave that alone. The only thing you'll need to take a look at is at the very bottom, you will have to add a group by. So just below the where part, you will have to add a group by. If you don't do this, and I will show you, get it out there. If you don't do this, it will always tell you to do it, because it will tell you, this specific field is invalid because it's not contained in either an aggregate function or a group by clause. It as good as it can. It says to you, add it to a group by, please. So I will add it to a group by. I also ordered this in a descending order. That's optional. You don't have to do that. As I could show you there, that's basically it. To do this for the other one, and I show you the other example here. This one was the reboot one. Add it. Let me just quickly grab that and throw it in a new one here. In here. And again, as you can see here, basically removed everything above the from. This is available. And then I just basically took the case that was there, which is this case piece. That if I go to the main query, that is similar, is exactly, are pretty much exactly the same thing as this case part that was in the original query, the original report. I've taken that, thrown that into the top, added the distinct count as I mentioned previously at the very bottom. In this case, it's a bit more complicated, or looks more complicated, because I used a case statement instead of just a single field. But the idea is exactly the same, is just a group by with that case statement in it. And then I ordered it again, but that was all that's needed. And then that's, again, the same idea. That's what you can run. That's what it gives you. You just have to make sure that you name it with like a chart. You add the chart prefix with the colon there. And that allows you to use it in your dashboards. Now, last thing I want to touch upon is Lansweeper sites. So let me quickly switch to my site. In Lansweeper sites, I've also adjusted the report. There are small differences simply because of the data available and things like that. But if I go to security, Patch Tuesday, and then just do last changed. There we go. This one. Same idea here. We also now rely on build number. We show you the highest patch available, which patch should be installed. The only thing missing here in your Lansweeper site will be the reboot status. Why? Because we don't have the same event log information available in Lansweeper sites yet. So that's the only thing that's missing. All the rest is the same. Obviously, main advantage of using Patch Tuesday in your site is that you can use this to aggregate multiple installations together. If I go to my thing, configuration, installations, look, I've got some of these are test installations, etc. But in your environment, if you have multiple Lansweeper installations, multiple offices, you're an MSP or something like that, that's where this makes sense. And you can basically have one report. You can run it once instead of having to run this report multiple times. But as I mentioned, main thing that isn't in here is the reboot status. All the rest is in here and should be working identical to that. So with all that being said, I hope that gives you a bit more information on the background and why we changed things, why we're going with builds now, why it's better. And I hope that the charts that I provided, again, you can find that information in the blog version as well. But I hope that these charts also give you what you needed, basically. I know some people have been asking for them. So with that, I wanted to make sure that I provide that to you guys as well. So that's it. Thank you for watching. And I'll catch you next time.